Picture this. You're at a dinner party, and someone across the table is telling a story that makes your skin crawl. Not because it's disgusting or frightening, but because something about this person's arrogance, their casual cruelty, or their desperate need for attention is triggering a rage inside you that feels completely disproportionate. Everyone else seems mildly annoyed at worst, but you're fantasizing about walking out or telling them exactly what you think of them. Here's what's really happening in that moment. You're not just reacting to them. You're having a violent encounter with a part of yourself that you've spent your entire life trying to pretend doesn't exist. That person across the table is acting as a mirror, reflecting back the very qualities you've buried so deep that you've forgotten they're there. And the intensity of your reaction, that's your unconscious mind screaming at you to pay attention. What if I told you that this uncomfortable moment holds the key to understanding why you sabotage your own success, why you keep attracting the same toxic relationships, and why you make decisions that your rational mind knows aren't good for you? Carl Jung discovered that these shadow encounters aren't random psychological glitches. They're invitations to reclaim the most powerful parts of yourself. By the end of our time together, I'll reveal Jung's most revolutionary insight about how these moments of intense dislike can become your roadmap to authentic power and unconscious freedom. Let me take you back to 1913, when Carl Jung, already a renowned psychiatrist, found himself descending into what he would later call his confrontation with the unconscious. Jung wasn't just having a career crisis or a midlife breakdown. He was experiencing something far more profound, a direct encounter with the parts of himself he had spent his entire professional life helping others avoid. Picture Jung, sitting in his study in Zurich, surrounded by the accolades of his successful career, yet feeling as though he was losing his grip on reality. He began experiencing vivid, disturbing visions. In one recurring vision, he saw Europe drowning in a sea of blood, with corpses and debris floating on crimson waves. This was months before World War I erupted, as if his unconscious mind was picking up on collective trauma that hadn't yet manifested in the physical world. But here's what makes Jung's story so relevant to your life today. Instead of medicating these visions away or dismissing them as symptoms of mental illness, Jung did something revolutionary. He decided to dialogue with them. He created what he called active imagination, literally having conversations with the figures that emerged from his unconscious mind. One of the most significant encounters was with a figure he called Philemon, an old man with the wings of a kingfisher. Jung would walk in his garden and have actual conversations with Philemon, treating him as a real person. To his neighbors, Jung appeared to be talking to himself, but Jung knew he was accessing a wisdom that his conscious mind alone could never reach. Now, before you dismiss this as the eccentricity of a brilliant but troubled mind, consider this: Jung's willingness to face his shadow, to dialogue with the rejected and repressed aspects of his psyche, didn't lead to madness. It led to some of the most profound insights about human nature that we have to this day. And these insights can transform how you understand every choice you make. Let's bring this into your world. Think about the last time you had an inexplicably strong reaction to someone. Maybe it was a coworker who seemed to get under your skin for no rational reason, or a public figure who made your blood boil. Jung would tell you that your intense reaction isn't really about them at all. It's about recognizing something in them that you've disowned in yourself. This is called projection, and it's one of the most common ways our shadow operates. The qualities we most despise in others are often the very qualities we've rejected in ourselves. The person who irritates you with their neediness might be reflecting back your own unacknowledged need for attention. The individual you judge for being selfish might be showing you the parts of yourself that you've never allowed to prioritize your own needs. But Jung discovered something even more profound about the shadow. He realized that our shadow doesn't just contain our negative traits. It often contains our greatest gifts, the parts of our personality that we've suppressed because they didn't fit with our family's expectations or society's demands. Consider Maria, a 45-year-old accountant who came to therapy feeling deeply unfulfilled despite having achieved everything she thought she wanted: a stable marriage, 2 successful children, and a comfortable income. During our sessions, she began exploring her dreams, and one dream kept recurring. In this dream, she was on stage, singing to a captivated audience, feeling more alive than she ever had in waking life. As we explored this dream using Jungian principles, Maria remembered that as a child, she had loved to sing. She had dreamed of becoming a professional musician, but her practical parents convinced her that music was just a hobby and that she needed a real career. She had buried her artistic self so completely that she had forgotten it existed. This is a perfect example of how our shadow can contain not just our repressed negative traits, but also our unlived potential. Maria's shadow held her creativity, her passion, her willingness to be vulnerable in front of others. By integrating these qualities back into her conscious life, she didn't quit her job to become a rock star, but she did start writing songs again, joined a local theater group, and found that this creative expression brought joy back into her marriage and made her a more present parent. Jung believed that the process of integrating our shadow is central to what he called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who we truly are, rather than who we think we should be. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. You can't integrate what you don't acknowledge, and you can't acknowledge what you're afraid to see. This is where Jung's approach becomes both challenging and transformative. He insisted that we must develop what he called moral courage, the willingness to face the parts of ourselves that we'd rather deny. This isn't about self-flagellation or drowning in guilt. It's about honest self-examination that leads to genuine self-acceptance. Let me share with you one of the most powerful exercises Jung developed for shadow work. He called it taking back projections. The next time you have a strong negative reaction to someone, instead of immediately judging them, ask yourself, what is this person showing me about myself that I don't want to see? If someone's arrogance triggers you, explore where in your life you might be afraid of your own power, or conversely, where you might be secretly arrogant but haven't admitted it. If someone's vulnerability makes you uncomfortable, examine whether you've cut yourself off from your own tender feelings. This practice isn't about becoming passive or accepting harmful behavior from others. It's about understanding that your emotional reactions are information about your inner world, not just commentary on the outer world. Jung also discovered that our dreams are one of the most direct ways our shadow communicates with us. In dreams, we often play out scenarios where we're doing exactly the things we would never do in waking life. The dream where you're cheating on your partner doesn't mean you want to have an affair. It might mean that some part of you feels confined and is seeking freedom. The dream where you're violently angry doesn't make you a dangerous person. It might mean that you've been suppressing your legitimate anger for so long that it's emerging in your sleep. But here's what Jung found most fascinating about shadow work. As we become more conscious of our own darkness, we become more compassionate toward the darkness in others. The person who has faced their own capacity for selfishness is less likely to be harshly judgmental when they encounter selfishness in others. The individual who has acknowledged their own fears and insecurities can hold space for these qualities in their friends and family members without trying to fix or change them. This is why Jung said that the most dangerous people in the world aren't those who know they have darkness within them, but those who believe they don't. History is filled with individuals who committed atrocious acts while believing they were serving a higher good. They were so disconnected from their own shadow that they projected it entirely onto others, seeing themselves as purely righteous and their enemies as purely evil. Let's explore how this plays out in modern relationships. Sarah and David had been married for 12 years when they came to couples therapy. Sarah complained that David was controlling and critical, while David insisted that Sarah was irresponsible and chaotic. They were locked in a pattern where each person's shadow was being triggered by the other. As we worked together, Sarah began to recognize that her criticism of David's controlling nature was partly a projection of her own disowned need for structure and boundaries. She had grown up in a chaotic household and had unconsciously chosen David partly because he provided the stability she craved. But instead of owning her need for order, she criticized him for being rigid. Similarly, David began to see that his frustration with Sarah's chaos was connected to his own repressed spontaneity. He had grown up in a household where mistakes were heavily criticized, so he had developed rigid systems to avoid making errors. Sarah's more relaxed approach to life reminded him of the carefree part of himself that he had buried. Instead of continuing to try to change each other, they began the work of integrating their own shadow qualities. Sarah started taking more responsibility for creating structure in her life, while David began allowing himself small moments of spontaneity. As each person reclaimed their projections, their marriage became less about trying to fix each other and more about supporting each other's growth. This brings us to one of Jung's most profound insights about the shadow and choice. He realized that most of our life decisions are made not from our conscious values, but from our unconscious fears and desires. The career path we choose might be an attempt to prove we're not lazy rather than an expression of our true interests. The partner we select might be someone who carries the projected qualities we've disowned in ourselves. The parenting style we adopt might be a reaction against our own childhood experiences rather than a conscious choice about how we want to raise our children. But Jung also discovered something hopeful. As we become more conscious of our shadow, we become more free to make authentic choices. When we're no longer running from the parts of ourselves we fear, we can respond to life's opportunities from a place of wholeness rather than unconscious reactivity. Consider the example of Robert, a successful businessman who realized through shadow work that his drive for achievement was partly motivated by a deep fear of being seen as worthless. His father had been highly critical, never satisfied with Robert's accomplishments. As an adult, Robert was unconsciously trying to earn approval from a father who had passed away years earlier. Once Robert recognized this pattern, he didn't lose his ambition, but his relationship to his ambition changed. He could work hard because he enjoyed the creative challenge, rather than because he was desperately trying to prove his worth. He could celebrate his successes without immediately reaching for the next goal, and he could handle setbacks without spiraling into self-criticism. This is the paradox of shadow work. By embracing what we fear about ourselves, we become less controlled by it. The emotions we're willing to feel lose their power to overwhelm us. The traits we're willing to acknowledge can be channeled constructively rather than emerging destructively. Jung also emphasized that shadow work isn't a one-time event, but a lifelong process. As we grow and change, new aspects of ourselves may emerge that need to be integrated. The qualities that served us in one phase of life might become problematic in another. The independence that helped us establish our career might need to be balanced with interdependence as we enter into intimate relationships. The nurturing that made us good parents might need to be balanced with boundaries as our children become adults. Now here's where Jung's understanding of the shadow connects to some of his most practical insights about daily life. He noticed that people who haven't done shadow work often experience what he called inflation, where they identify so completely with their positive qualities that they lose touch with their humanity. The person who sees themselves as always kind might struggle to set healthy boundaries. The individual who prides themselves on being rational might be cut off from their emotional intelligence. The parent who believes they're always patient might be suppressing anger that emerges in passive-aggressive ways. Jung suggested that true psychological health requires what he called holding the tension of opposites. This means being able to acknowledge that we can be both kind and firm, both rational and emotional, both generous and appropriately selfish. Instead of splitting these qualities into good and bad categories, we learn to access different aspects of ourselves as situations require. This leads us to Jung's revolutionary insight that I promised to share with you, the revelation that can transform how you understand every choice you make. Are you ready? Jung discovered that the goal of psychological development isn't to eliminate our shadow, but to develop a conscious relationship with it. He called this process making the unconscious conscious, and he believed it was the most important work any human being could do. Here's the profound part. When you stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be whole, your decisions begin to come from a place of authentic self-knowledge rather than unconscious fear. You stop choosing careers to prove you're not lazy and start choosing work that genuinely engages your interests. You stop selecting partners to complete you and start attracting relationships that allow you to be fully yourself. You stop parenting from your own unhealed wounds and start guiding your children from a place of conscious awareness. Jung's revelation is this: your shadow is not your enemy. It's the guardian of your unlived life, the keeper of your suppressed gifts, and the source of your most authentic power. The very qualities you've been running from might contain the keys to your most fulfilling choices. But integration requires courage. It requires what Jung called the moral courage to be yourself. This means being willing to disappoint others when living authentically conflicts with their expectations. It means risking the security of familiar patterns to explore new possibilities. It means accepting that you're not who you thought you were, but discovering that who you actually are is far more interesting. The person who has done this work doesn't make perfect choices, but they make conscious choices. They're less likely to be driven by unconscious compulsions and more likely to respond thoughtfully to life's challenges. They can acknowledge their mistakes without being destroyed by shame, and they can celebrate their successes without falling into grandiosity. Most importantly, they become capable of what Jung called love without projection. Instead of trying to change their loved ones into what they need them to be, they can appreciate them for who they are. Instead of expecting others to carry their disowned qualities, they can meet relationships as two complete individuals choosing to share their lives. So as you leave this exploration and return to your daily choices, I invite you to carry Jung's revelation with you. The next time you face a decision, ask yourself, am I choosing this from fear or from love? Am I trying to prove something? Or am I expressing something authentic? What would I choose if I weren't afraid of the parts of myself I've been trying to hide? Your shadow isn't the dark force working against you. It's the missing piece of your wholeness, waiting to be welcomed home. And when you have the courage to integrate it, your choices become expressions of your true self rather than reactions to your fears. If this exploration of Jung's insights has resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with shadow work in the comments below. What aspects of yourself have you been reluctant to acknowledge? How might embracing these qualities change the choices you make? Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into Jung's transformative psychology and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next exploration. The anima and animus, why you keep attracting the same type of person. Until then, remember that the path to authentic living begins with the courage to see yourself clearly, shadows and all.